Hey guys, Jordan Hammond coming to you here again by Build Hold. Wanted to do a video today based on some feedback that I've got, some questions that I've got, asking about the risks associated with buying a small business. And yes, there are absolutely risks. Let's talk about it today. All right, so there's also risk to walking outside of your door in the morning, right? We all know there's risk involved with everything. So the question comes down to, how do you mitigate risk? Now, first I'll just get into a little bit about why I think that the micro private equity, purchasing a business versus starting a business already reduces so much of that risk. Because you can really only assess risk when you compare it to something else, right? So let's take starting a business versus purchasing a business. Now, starting a business, you are starting from scratch. You have no customers, you have no incoming cash into the business, you have no suppliers, you have nothing. You are setting all that up. And really what it is, it's a race to get cash before you run out of cash. And I'll just relay my experience here with that. I've owned two businesses, and my first one failed absolutely spectacularly very quickly. Don't get me wrong, I learned a ton from it, but it failed within a period of 11 months. It actually failed on day one when I opened it because I didn't get cash quicker than my cash was going out. I knew very little of the industry. I was figuring it out as I was going, right? I jumped off the cliff and I was building a parachute as I fell. And I built a fraction of my parachute before I hit the ground. So that is why 50% of new startups fail within 5 years, 70% fail within 10 years, right? Terrible ratios. Now, my second business, I did a little bit differently. To carry on the analogy, I built my parachute. I built 3/4 of my parachute before I jumped off the cliff. And I did that by learning the business from the inside. I got paid to learn by essentially working for another company and learning the business from the inside out. And, I think it's a fantastic way to get a jump start into business if you're young and you're, just hungry and you want to learn some way. Might as well get paid to learn. Now, that worked out really well. I had a bunch of customer contacts, supplier contacts. I knew the business, I knew the market, I knew my competitive advantage, right? So day one, it was like I wasn't starting at 0, I was starting at 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10. Now, 4 years later, I thought, well, how can I repeat that? I want to start something else. I want to get into something else. All I knew was starting a business at that point, and I thought, well, how can I repeat that? And everything I looked at, I didn't know how to do it. I either didn't know the industry, I didn't know the business model, and you can read some books and things like that, but that's not actually knowing it, right? That's just head knowledge. Now, I came to the point where I said, I don't want to go back and work for somebody for a couple of years just to learn the business. I was kind of past doing that, right? So I started to think, well, how can I learn this business? How can I start from 5 or 6 instead of starting from 0? And essentially what I came up with is I can buy my way to 5 or 6. And that's exactly what purchasing a small business does for you. You're buying established customers, you're buying brand equity, you're buying supplier relationships, you're buying systems and past performance. You're buying all of these things, and most importantly, you're buying the owner's sophistication, the owner's intelligence, the owner's experience. All that is, if you're structuring it properly, which I'll talk about, is getting transferred to you. So you're not starting at 0. You're starting at 5, 6, 7, right? Now you're paying for that, but you're not starting there. So right away, that takes you from a failure probability of 50% within 5 years to I don't actually know the numbers on failure percentage after purchasing a small business, but I would assume it would be a lot lower than that. I could check with some of my mentors on it, but I would assume 10 to 15%, maybe even under that, tops. And that brings me to the second point, how you mitigate, that maybe 5 to 15%, how you mitigate that risk inherent in purchasing a small business. And most of that risk shows up, I'd say pretty much all of it shows up in the transaction itself. And there's two ways to mitigate that. First way is due diligence. So having a due diligence process that doesn't just look for the superficial, kind of check boxes that you need to check off to make yourself think that you got a good deal, but one that approaches it more like a private investigator, right? You're looking for some dirt. Like you're in there with the shovel, digging up things, pulling on strings with the mindset of there's some dirt somewhere, I just got to find where it is. And that's why I say it's an art and not a science, because there's not a specific list of questions that you can ask that's going to lead you to that. It's all situation specific, right? So that's number one. Number two is your deal structure. And this, I would say, is the most crucial one. You need to have a deal structure that incentivizes the seller to partner with you in the transition and training of the business so that your success is their success. All right, I'll say that again. You need to have a deal structure that incentivizes the seller to be partnered with you in your success. Now, what are the ways that you do that? Well, the number one way you don't do that is by writing a check for 100% of the business, handing it over and saying, thanks for the deal, you take the business, and then you call back the next week and you say, oh, I'd actually like to go through this and this and this with you. And they say, oh yeah, we could do that. Let's set up a time for 3 weeks from now and we can chat then. Now, I'm not saying that sellers don't want to help you transition, and certainly there are amazing sellers out there that would still help you even after they have 100% of their money. But human nature at a subconscious level says that when you are, whole, when you're 100% paid, you're just going to be less incentivized, whether you know it or not. So what we want to do is incentivize that seller through a couple different ways. Number one, we never want to give 100% of the money up front. Even when we're doing a 100% down deal, like that first deal that I mentioned on the video last week, where we did pay 100% for it, we're never just handing a check for 100 grand or for 200 grand or whatever the purchase price is. We're giving a chunk of that as the first down payment, and then we're putting the second chunk into escrow based on conditions that are to our satisfaction, being that the business has been transitioned and trained to our satisfaction, and then we release that money. So they are always, knowing that, hey, I need to step up and I need to perform to get this business where it needs to be, or else I'm not going to get that second, chunk of my money. So that is when you're doing 100% down, right? There's kind of two down payments. Now, what we're always going for is a deal structure where the seller is taking back some of the financing. That is the best way to ensure that they're going to be incentivized. And we can do that through an earnout where they're actually tied to the performance of the business, or we could do that just through simple, financing. 400 grand over 4 years at X interest rate, if there is an interest rate, right? So they are incentivized that the business will succeed. If the business doesn't succeed, we can walk away from the business at that point and only eat what we've put into it, or we can simply say, we can go back and renegotiate and say, hey, this business is doing not even close to what it was when you were operating it. We've tried this, this, and this, kind of have that ongoing dialogue with the seller and say, if this thing doesn't turn around, we're going to have to cut X amount off of your note because it just doesn't make sense at our original deal structure anymore. We can do that because there's still money outstanding And it's not like a hardball tactic. It's there's a constant conversation. We want to be engaged with the seller throughout the process. We don't just want to hit them with an email one day saying, hey, this is where it's at. I'm handing your business back to you. But those are extreme scenarios. What it does is, just like I said before, it incentivizes the seller to want to help you. So it just mitigates the risk of the seller getting their money and saying, see ya, and then they literally disappear. And especially with an internet deal, where you never meet the seller, it's just way too easy for them to disappear, right? And there's other ways to incentivize them as well. They can stay on as an equity partner, is one great way. Then they're really incentivized to the upside of the business. So, if we're looking at doing those two things through due diligence and the deal structure, it just cuts out a ton of that risk. But it's not easy to do. That's why these deals take a long time to negotiate, because not every seller is willing to have that type of a deal structure. Not every seller is willing to go through that deep of due diligence. So it's the process that creates these amazing investments, and the process reduces a lot of risk at the same time if the process is followed. So just wanted to touch on that. I know there was a few people that were curious about it. Hope that helped you. Any other questions or comments, please leave them below. Subscribe, other feedback, and look forward to doing some more videos, answering some more questions in the future.